My family stole $82,000 from my 7-year-old son's life-saving surgery fund. I know it sounds unbelievable, but it's the truth. While I was begging them for help to save Mason, the grandson they used to hold and kiss on the cheek every time they saw him, my sister, Sophia, looked me straight in the eye and coldly said, "If it's meant to be, he'll live." One day after she made that statement, their lives began to fall apart. I know this sounds extreme, but when you discover that your closest family members planned in detail to steal money meant to save your son's life, not out of necessity or desperation, but pure greed, you'll understand why I made this decision. Before I get into the details of this story, thank you for choosing to listen to our story among hundreds of stories on this entertainment platform. Every view from you is motivation for us to keep sharing real-life stories. Hello everyone, I'm Jordan, 34 years old. The story I'm telling today happened 2 years ago, when my 7-year-old son Mason needed heart surgery to save his tiny body that was fighting every day with weak heartbeats and difficult breathing. Software engineer at Microsoft in Seattle, a stable job with decent pay. But ever since Mason was born, my life has revolved around taking care of the little guy. Mason has hypoplastic left heart syndrome from when he was still in his mom's womb. This is a severe congenital disability that makes the heart only half functional. Anna, my ex-wife, couldn't handle the pressure. When Mason was 6 months old and started fighting the illness with his first surgery, one morning, I woke up to find Anna's suitcase had disappeared along with her. On the kitchen table was just a crumpled piece of paper she had hastily written. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." At that moment, complete confusion overwhelmed me. But when I looked into Mason's clear eyes lying in his crib, I knew I had no choice but to fight for the little guy. Over the past 7 years, we've been through 3 major surgeries. Each time, I felt like my heart stopped beating when Mason was taken into the operating room. But the little guy always bravely pulled through, even though we knew these were just temporary solutions. Then 2 years ago, Dr. Anderson from Seattle Children's Hospital brought me the news I'd been waiting for all these years. He excitedly explained about the new, improved Norwood procedure. "Jordan, this could be the only chance for Mason to have a completely normal heart." Right then, my heart lit up with hope for the first time since my son was born. But when I heard the number $95,000, I felt as though someone had thrown a bucket of cold water on me. The insurance company refused to pay because the procedure was experimental. The following year became another battle for me. I worked overtime on weekends, took on freelance projects at night. My beloved Honda Civic was sold, replaced with an old pickup truck to take Mason to the hospital. My retirement savings, accumulated over many years, were completely drained. Every dollar earned was carefully saved in a separate account for Mason. Finally, after 2 years of hard work, I had $82,000 in hand. Just needed $13,000 more. And then, a miracle happened. Dr. Anderson called to say there was a surgery slot next month, and he agreed to reduce the fee to $82,000. In that moment, I thought this was the beginning of a new life for Mason. But I had no idea that just one night at Mom and Dad's house would change everything. After months of waiting, I finally reached the day I'd been dreaming of for 7 years. That morning, I stood at the hospital reception desk with absolute confidence that everything was ready. Mason sat in the chair behind me, carelessly humming Wheels on the bus that he learned at school. My son's clear singing made me smile, thinking this would be the last time I'd have to worry about the tiny heart beating in his chest. Receptionist Patricia, whom I'd gotten to know after many visits bringing Mason for checkups, smiled warmly when she saw us. "Hi Jordan, today's Mason's big day, right?" I nodded excitedly, pulling out my bank card with the excitement of a kid opening Christmas presents. "That's right, Patricia. We're ready." But when Patricia swiped the card through the payment machine for the first $35,000, a red beep sounded. The machine displayed declined. Right then, a cold feeling started creeping into my heart. Patricia looked at me with worried eyes, then gently suggested, "Maybe there's a technical issue with the card. Jordan, let me try again." The second time, the red beep sounded again. Same with the third time. Patricia smiled awkwardly, trying to reassure me. "Sometimes the banking system has issues. Jordan, do you have another card?" I gave her my backup credit card with fragile hope. But the result was the same. After 4 attempts with 2 different cards, I knew this wasn't a technical issue anymore. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app, my hands shaking. And when the screen showed my account balance, my world collapsed. Such a big zero had never been so shocking. $0. My eyes went blurry, my body completely numb. I blinked many times, hoping this was just a nightmare. But the number didn't change. Mason was still singing happily behind me, completely unaware that his life was hanging by a thread. My son's clear voice made my heart feel like it was being twisted tight. With trembling fingers and sweat pouring from my palms, I scrolled down to the transaction history, and what I saw made my blood freeze. 28 wire transfers, each between $2,000 $4,000, all made within 3 days. These numbers were carefully calculated to avoid triggering the bank security alerts. Patricia noticed something was wrong when she saw my face turn pale and asked worriedly, "Jordan, are you okay? We can postpone if needed." But when I told her I needed time, Patricia shook her head regretfully and announced, "I'm so sorry, Jordan. If payment isn't made within 24 hours, we'll have to give this slot to another patient." At that moment, deep despair overwhelmed me. I immediately called the bank's hotline. After 10 minutes of waiting that felt like an eternity, the customer service representative confirmed, "Sir, all transactions were authenticated with OTP codes sent to your phone number." When I checked my messages, I didn't see any OTP codes. But then I remembered to check my deleted messages folder. And there I found dozens of OTP messages, all of which had been deliberately deleted. That's when I realized the terrifying truth. This wasn't a spontaneous theft. This was a carefully calculated plan, executed by someone with access to my phone. When Mason stopped singing and ran over to hug my leg, asking why we weren't going into Dr. Anderson's office, I had to swallow my tears and bend down to hug the little guy. "Son, I need to handle a few things first. We'll be back soon." In my desperation, I could only think of one place to turn for help. But I never expected that the very place I went to for help was where it all began. After leaving the hospital, I honestly didn't know what to do. The bank said the investigation would take 2 weeks, but Mason only had 24 hours. With no other options, I drove straight to Spokane, to the house where I grew up, with the fragile hope that family would help in this emergency. 3 hours later, when the car with its loud rumbling and rattling sounds stopped in front of the yard full of messy construction materials, Mason was fast asleep in the back seat. I let the little guy keep sleeping and walked into the house alone. When I walked into Mom and Dad's house that night, the smell of fresh paint and sawdust hit my face like a slap. The kitchen where I'd eaten thousands of breakfasts had turned into a construction site. The premium oak cabinets were partially installed, and the granite countertops were still wrapped in their packaging. My dad, Robert, was sitting on the couch in the living room, while my mom, Linda, stood by a temporary bar setup. Sophia, my sister, sat in the armchair with a new diamond necklace sparkling under the lights. Kevin, her boyfriend, had a brand new MacBook open on the coffee table, the screen displaying complex cryptocurrency charts. As soon as Mom saw me, she asked in surprise, "Jordan, what are you doing here at this hour?" I swallowed hard, trying to control my emotions and explain the situation. "Mom, I'm having problems with my bank account. Someone stole Mason's surgery money. I need to borrow $35,000 overnight to keep his surgery slot." Dad looked up from his newspaper when I finished speaking, looking at me with confused eyes and said, "Stolen? How could that happen? Are you sure it's not because you're bad with money management?" Sophia immediately jumped in with an indifferent tone. "You're always so dramatic. People live with heart conditions all the time. Mason's still healthy, isn't he?" Anger started simmering inside me. I tried to stay calm and continued pleading. "I swear to you both, this is a real emergency. Mason only has 24 hours. I'll pay it back as soon as the bank resolves this." But the following action from the woman who gave birth to me threw me into a pit of despair. Mom shook her head, her voice sounding regretful but firm. "Jordan, we want to help too, but we've already committed all our money to this renovation. $95,000 is too much to throw away on a surgery that might fail." As soon as Mom finished speaking, my heart clenched when I heard the word throwaway used to describe my grandson's life. While I was still trying to keep my voice from shaking with rising anger, Sophia followed up with words that left me stunned. "If Mason's meant to live, He'll live. That's fate. Before I could respond, Kevin looked up from his laptop screen and said with an expert tone, "Jordan, you should invest in crypto instead of putting money into uncertain things. I just made $30,000 from Ethereum last week." Immediately, an unusual thought flashed through my mind. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling slightly, and rechecked the timestamps of the transactions. Then I saw details that made my heart stop. They were all made at 2 to 3 a.m., precisely on the nights Mason and I stayed here when he was seriously ill. My phone password was Mason's birthday, 051517. I used the same password for everything and never changed it because I was afraid of forgetting it. But more importantly, they could access my phone while I was sleeping to receive and delete OTP messages. I always left my phone charging in the old kitchen, right next to where Kevin stayed up late with his laptop. For a few seconds, my head was spinning. I looked around at the expensive new kitchen, Sophia's diamond necklace, and Kevin's latest MacBook Pro. Part of me still hoped I was wrong, that these were just strange coincidences. However, the pieces kept falling into place in my mind, becoming more straightforward and transparent, and ultimately more and more painful. I stood still like a statue for a few seconds, trying to digest this truth. Then, in a bold moment, I decided to test my suspicion. I looked straight at Kevin. "Do you know about OTP codes?" Kevin looked up from the screen, his eyes suddenly alert. "Why are you asking that?" His defensive question gave me the answer I needed. An innocent person would answer directly, without needing to ask why. In the heavy atmosphere, the whole room seemed to sink into silence. Sophia suddenly stopped talking, and Mom and Dad pretended to be busy with unnecessary tasks. Kevin avoided my eyes, turning back to his laptop screen. As for me, a completely different pain spread through my chest. Not the pain of losing money, but the pain of betrayal. From the very people I trusted most. From my own flesh and blood family. I stood still in the house where I once trusted most for a few more seconds, watching their faces, hoping to find something to prove myself wrong. But there wasn't. Finally, I turned and walked out without saying another word. I kissed sleeping Mason's forehead and drove back to Seattle in the night, with a heavy heart full of unanswered questions. In that cruel moment, I still didn't want to believe this brutal truth. But 3 days later, when the police called, all doubts were confirmed. After driving more than 2 hours from Spokane back to Seattle, I opened the door to my small apartment, completely exhausted. Mason had fallen asleep in the back seat after eating lightly along the way, and I had to carry the little guy to bed without waking him. The modest 2-bedroom apartment suddenly became suffocatingly quiet. I sat dazed on the old, worn couch. Every time I looked at my phone, those transaction numbers appeared like knives cutting into my heart. $82,000. Gone. In the very house where I grew up with so many happy and sad memories. In the darkness of the room, I couldn't stop thinking about my sister, Sophia. 2 years younger than me, had always been the family's pride and favorite. And now, she and her beloved boyfriend had made me look like a fool. Sitting alone, memories of Sophia from childhood flooded back like a flood. She was always the family's little princess. When Sophia wanted to learn violin, Mom and Dad signed her up immediately and bought her a $3,000 violin. When I tried to join the school football team, they were annoyed and said I should focus on studying instead of fooling around. But it didn't stop there. Bitterness from deep in my heart welled up when I remembered seeing Sophia get a new pink Honda Civic for college, while I had to work 3 jobs to pay my own tuition. I always thought it was because I was the oldest child, responsible for yielding to my sister. But now I understand, in their eyes, I was never the beloved child, just a free helper. Around 2 a.m., little footsteps came out from the bedroom. Mason, with sleepy eyes and messy hair, shuffled around looking for Dad in the dark apartment. When he saw me, the little guy climbed onto the couch and curled up in my arms like a kitten seeking warmth. Mason asked sleepily, "Dad, why aren't you sleeping? Did I do something wrong?" In that moment, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. I held the little guy tight, feeling his steady breathing and the little heart beating weakly in his chest. I stroked his soft hair and whispered with a choked voice, "No, son, you didn't do anything wrong. I'm thinking about how healthy you'll be tomorrow. Everything's going to be okay." At that very moment, When I felt my son's absolute trust in my arms, a steel determination formed within me. Blood family might betray, but I swore I'd never let my child pay the price for their greed. The next morning, with bloodshot eyes from staying up all night, I called Derek before I could completely lose my composure. He answered on the second ring. My voice was shakier than I wanted when I said to Derek, "Derek, I need help. Something terrible happened." Derek immediately asked worriedly, "What's wrong, Jordan? You sound frantic." I told him everything. The surgery money, the 24-hour deadline, and my growing suspicions about my family. There was a long silence on the other end. Derek finally said with a determined voice, "Bring Mason here right now. You can't drag him to the police station at this time. Emma and I will take care of him while you handle this." Derek and his wife lived 15 minutes away in a cute little wooden house that always smelled like Ethiopian coffee and fresh oatmeal cookies. Proof that some people really know how to make a house feel like home. Emma opened the door before I knocked. One look at my face, and she hugged Mason first. Emma bent down and asked Mason, "Are you tired, honey?" Mason nodded, hugging his teddy bear tight. Emma smiled warmly and said to the little guy, "Perfect. You and Teddy can watch Disney cartoons while Uncle Derek and your dad do some boring grown-up work." I forced a smile and said to Mason, "Just for a little while, buddy. I'll be back soon. Okay?" Mason nodded, already drawn in by the big screen and the promise of popcorn. He's braver than I, always. Derek squeezed my shoulder as we walked out the door and said, "Go, do what you need to do. And Jordan, how much money do you need?" Right then, my throat choked up having to ask for money. "I need $15,000, Derek. I swear I'll pay it back as soon as—" Derek cut me off with words that made me want to cry. "My kitchen can wait, Mason can't. I'll transfer the money right now." Less than 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a confirmation message for $15,000. I scraped together another $18,000 from 5 credit cards, maxing out every single limit and incurring horrible cash advance fees. A total $33,000. But I was still $2,000 short. I sat in the Target parking lot, opening my laptop desperately like a drowning man. I filled out loan applications at 8 different banks and 5 online lending companies, including those with names like Quick Cash and Emergency Funds. While waiting for results, I drove to the Seattle police station. Detective Rodriguez, a Latina woman in her 40s with tired eyes, took my case after the front desk officer explained the situation. She pointed to a thin cushioned chair across from a metal desk and said, "Sit down, Jordan. Tell me everything from the beginning." I laid it all out. $82,000 disappeared over 3 weeks through 28 separate transactions, each between $2,000 to $4,000 to avoid automatic fraud alerts. Timestamps showed they happened between 2 to 3 a.m., only on the 3 nights Mason and I stayed at Mom and Dad's. Detective Rodriguez asked me with a pen ready on a notepad, "Do you suspect anyone specific? Who could know your phone password and have regular access opportunities?" I said it out loud, which made it more real. My family, Mom, Dad, my sister Sophia, and her boyfriend Kevin. My phone password is Mason's birthday, 051517. Anyone in that house could know that. Detective Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully, writing notes, then asked, "What does Kevin do for a living?" I answered, "Tech consulting," Sophia says, "cryptocurrency trading. He's always got computers and talks about working with international markets." She looked up from her notes and announced seriously, "Jordan, this is serious grand larceny. Theft over $50,000. If we can prove it, they're looking at 5 to 15 years federal prison, possibly more for identity theft and electronic fraud." At that moment, I nodded and felt a bit of dark satisfaction. Good. Detective Rodriguez continued explaining, "We'll start with bank record subpoenas to trace where the money went. I'll also contact the computer crimes unit to analyze your phone if you agree. The investigation process could take 6 to 8 weeks to complete." Hearing this number, I felt as though cold water had been thrown on me. 6 to 8 weeks, while Mason only had 18 hours to keep his surgery slot. When I stepped out of the police station with all the evidence submitted, I sat in my car, checking my phone one last time anxiously, and like a final miracle, a confirmation email from a peer-to-peer lending app appeared. "Your $2,000 loan has been approved." A final ray of hope lit up inside me. I knew this loan had terrible interest rates, 36% annually, but saving for Mason's future mattered more than anything right now. When the money was transferred to my account, and the balance showed $35,000, I drove like crazy to Seattle Children's Hospital. Every red light I hit was like torture, because I knew Mason's surgery slot would expire in just a few hours. I couldn't waste a single second when my son's life was hanging in the balance. When I walked into the hospital for the second time in 2 days, Patricia looked at me with eyes mixing surprise and hope. Perhaps she'd seen too many families have to give up their dreams of saving their children because of financial constraints. Patricia asked me carefully, her tone suggesting she was afraid to burst a bubble of hope. "Jordan, did you resolve the financial issue?" I nodded and answered with a voice trembling from emotion. "That's right, Patricia, we're ready." This time, when Patricia swiped each card through the payment machine, every green beep that sounded was like the sound of heavenly bells. $15,000 from Derek, $18,000 from maxed-out credit cards, and $2,000 from the high-interest loan. Total of $35,000 to save my son's life. Patricia finished printing the receipt, smiled brightly, and announced, "Payment successful. Mason's Norwood surgery is scheduled for next Monday at 7 a.m. You'll need to bring him in Sunday night for prep." Right in that moment, I felt like I'd conquered the whole world. After so many days of struggle, sacrifice, and betrayal, my son finally had a chance at a normal heart. That afternoon, I drove to Derek's house to pick up Mason, but I was in a completely different mood. When Derek and Emma saw me appear with a smile on my face after days of stress, they both understood immediately. Derek asked me happily with bright eyes, "Success?" I nodded and hugged Mason tightly as he ran out, feeling my son's warm breath. "Mason's getting his surgery next week, buddy." Before I could fully enjoy this rare moment of happiness, the phone rang. Mom showed on the screen. Part of my rational mind told me to let it ring, but another part still held fragile hope that maybe there was some explanation. I walked to Derek's back porch, answered and said, "Hello, Mom." No greeting, no questions about Mason. My mom roared with a voice sharp as a blade. "How dare you call the police on your own family? Do you know what you've done?" Hearing her tone, my last hope about this being a misunderstanding shattered like a soap bubble. My chest tightened when I realized they still felt no remorse. I answered, trying to stay calm though my voice was already shaking. "I reported a crime, Mom. Not reporting family." My mom screamed with a voice so high I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Crime? Are you crazy? After everything I've done for you and that damn kid." Hearing how Mom referred to my son, my heart felt like it was stabbed. That damn kid. Not grandson, not Mason, but that damn kid. In that moment, anger like fire flared up in my chest. I asked through gritted teeth, "Done what? Steal my son's life-saving money to buy new kitchen cabinets?" But my mom's attitude through the call remained the same, even somewhat out of control. She screamed like a demon. "I didn't steal anything. You're selfish and crazy. You're destroying the family because of that kid." Dad chimed in from the background with a voice cold as ice. "You're destroying yourself and the family over that meaningless illness. Jordan, it's time you accept the reality that some lives aren't worth saving." After hearing this, the blood in my body felt like it had frozen. Not worth saving. They were talking about my son. Sophia chimed in with a tone so indifferent it was chilling. "You're always so dramatic. Nobody wants the kid to die. You need to learn to be more realistic. Not every child is born to live long." Hearing this, my world came crashing down. They didn't just steal money. They also thought Mason wasn't worth living. My son, an innocent 7-year-old boy, in their eyes was just a burden that needed to be eliminated. I screamed with a choked voice, "That's my son, my son." My mom coldly replied, "And that's why you should never have had a kid." After hearing this, I hung up and threw my phone to the floor. My whole body shook like a leaf, tears flowing uncontrollably. When I sat down on the floor to regain my composure, I finally saw their true faces clearly. Not a lack of understanding, not a difficult situation, but pure cruelty. From here on, there was no more contest. Mason was always my only choice, and now I knew I was right. After that fateful call from my family, I had no more hope in the people who were once my flesh and blood. I thanked Derek's family for their help and brought my son back to our small apartment. Putting aside all the chaos, what I needed to do was focus on my son so Mason would have the best chance. Fortunately, during all that chaos, my son's surgery finally succeeded after hours of tense waiting with Derek and Emma by my side. I didn't have blood family there, and thinking about the people who betrayed me, I couldn't stop feeling empty. The first weeks after surgery, I spent all my time caring for Mason. The little guy recovered miraculously fast, his little heart working normally for the first time in his life. Derek and Emma took turns visiting, bringing food and toys, becoming the real family I never had. But despite being happy that Mason was healthy, I still couldn't escape the pain of betrayal. Every night when Mason slept soundly after leaving the hospital, I thought about my blood family and felt like part of me had died with them. 6 months later, the investigation proved more complex than expected because Kevin had employed multiple layers of cryptocurrency to conceal his tracks. When Mason had fully recovered and returned to school, Detective Rodriguez called. Her voice was serious but with a hint of satisfaction when she said to me, "Jordan, we have complete investigation results. There is sufficient evidence to prosecute all 4 individuals. Can you come to the station to hear the details?" At that moment, complex feelings surged through me, both relieved that justice was about to be served, and worried about what I was about to hear. When I sat in Detective Rodriguez's office for the second time, what she revealed shocked me more than I could imagine. Kevin wasn't just a simple thief, but a real tech mastermind. He'd set up a complex money conversion system using 4 different cryptocurrencies: Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, and finally Privacy Coin, to erase any traces completely. Detective Rodriguez explained in detail. Kevin used separate devices to copy OTP codes, delete messages, and cover his tracks perfectly. Sophia created fake invoices from a non-existent design consulting company to justify the money source. However, the most shocking discovery was the emails between Sophia and Kevin. In them, my sister wrote, "Jordan will never know. He's too naive and trusts family." As for Mom and Dad, they not only knew but also entirely supported it. Detective Rodriguez let me hear recorded calls collected from Sophia and Kevin's phones. My mom said over the phone with a cold voice, "Sometimes a mother has to make hard decisions for her children. Jordan needs to learn to let go." My dad added with a contemptuous voice, "Jordan throws money at that kid like a wishing well. It's time he faces reality." While listening to those cruel words, I clenched both hands until my knuckles turned white. My jaw was clenched tight, but I sat still and kept listening. I needed to hear it all. I needed to know how far their cruelty went. When the recording ended, Detective Rodriguez looked at me with sympathetic eyes and announced, "Jordan, Kevin faces 10 to 15 years in federal prison for identity theft and electronic fraud. Sophia and your parents will get 7 to 12 years for conspiracy, money laundering, and organized fraud. The total amount they have to repay is $125,000. They'll have to sell their house." Hearing these numbers, I slowly sat down in the chair, both hands still clenched. Part of me felt dark satisfaction, but mostly I just felt empty and exhausted. In that moment, I understood that the family love I'd always craved had never really existed. Finally, after many days living in a mix of waiting and anger, the criminal trial took place on a day in late November. I sat in the front row with Derek and Emma beside me, and Mason was at school and didn't know anything. Kevin came in first, wearing a cheap suit and eyes avoiding everything in the courtroom. He'd pled guilty to all charges in exchange for 10 years instead of the possible 15. His lawyer, a young public defender who looked exhausted, read a brief statement about fraudulent lifestyle and deep remorse. Kevin didn't look at me once. Sophia came next, wearing a black dress and sunglasses indoors. She'd been crying or wanted everyone to think she'd been crying. She read a long letter about being manipulated, not understanding consequences, and loving her grandson. Her lawyer tried to prove she was Kevin's victim, but the emails they found told a different story. She got 8 years. Finally, my parents. They sat rigid like statues, hands clenched, staring straight ahead. No tears, no apology letters, no emotional expressions. Their lawyer, an older man with a tired voice, stated that his clients had admitted guilt and asked for the court's mercy. Judge Martinez, a stern Latina woman in her 50s, remained emotionless throughout the sentencing process. But when it came time for her final statement, her voice hardened. Judge Martinez stared at each defendant and said, "In 15 years on this bench, I've seen many cases of family fraud. Retirement funds stolen, college accounts drained, inheritances seized. But I have never, and I repeat, never seen a case where defendants not only stole money, but stole the hope of life from an innocent child." She looked directly at my parents and continued, "Robert and Linda, your recorded comments show a cold cruelty this court rarely sees. Calling your grandson that kid, and saying your son needs to learn to accept reality about a 7-year-old's possible death. This is one of the most cruel family betrayals this court has ever seen. Dad got 9 years. Mom got 9 years. All had to repay $145,000, including interest and legal fees, divided according to each person's ability to pay. When they were led away in handcuffs, my mom looked at me for the first time that day. In her eyes, I expected to see regret, apology, something resembling a mother's love. Instead, I saw anger. Even now, even here, she still believed I was the wrong one. At that moment, I felt nothing at all. Mason is now almost 10, running around the soccer field like any other kid. No, not like any other kid, but faster, stronger. The Norwood surgery succeeded beyond Dr. Anderson's expectations. 3 years and 2 minor follow-up surgeries later, Mason's heart works better than normal. No more blue around his lips when he runs. No more hands clutching his chest when he laughs too hard. No more sleepless nights listening to his breathing. Last week, he scored his first goal in Little League Soccer, a shot from 15 yards into the low corner that gave the goalie no chance. When he ran toward me in the stands, his face bright with pride and full of the life I'd worried he'd never have, I cried. Not from sadness, but from pure happiness. This was the moment I'd fought to have. This is why it was all worth it. The bank fully repaid the $82,000, plus $12,000 in interest, after 14 months of a complex investigation. I paid Derek back completely in 18 months, even though he never once mentioned money. He just kept asking about Mason's health and inviting us to weekend barbecue dinners. That's real family, not by blood, but by choice. Derek and Emma chose to love us when my blood family chose money. I've never contacted any of them again. No letters from prison, no collect calls, no emails from new accounts. Just silence, the best gift they could give me. Sometimes Mason asks about Grandpa, Grandma, and Aunt Sophia. I've chosen honesty. I told Mason one evening when he asked why Grandpa and Grandma don't come to his soccer games. "Honey, there are people you don't need in your life, even when they're family. Sometimes, real family are the people who choose to love you, like Uncle Derek and Aunt Emma." Mason nodded with understanding beyond his years, hugged me tight and whispered, "You're the best family." And that's all I needed to hear. That's where my story ends. If there's a message I want to convey to you through this story, it's probably that you shouldn't put too much trust in family or close friends, because sometimes they're the ones who betray you the most. Also, don't despair in the most challenging times, because you're the parent of your children and have the responsibility to fight for them. And who knows, besides you, might be people who, though not blood-related, are still willing to sacrifice for you more than blood family. Before ending this story, I want to ask you a question. Did I go too far by calling the police on my entire blood family, or not far enough? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts about this story. What would you do if you were in my situation? Thank you for taking the time to listen to our story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can share more real stories with you. See you again. I personally removed my father's breathing tube after he opened his eyes and said, "Your grandfather is waiting for me in the field." No one in the family understood my decision. No one knew why I dared choose that moment to end my father's life. But it wasn't my decision, it was his. This is a story about knowing when to let go, and when to hold on tight, even when the whole world thinks you're wrong. Before delving into the story details, I want to emphasize that regardless of the circumstances in which we're born, we all face difficult decisions and moments that define our lives and the lives of our loved ones. Hello everyone, I'm Mason Thompson, 35 years old. The story I'm telling today began on a night last December, when I came home to visit the family farm in Iowa. During late winter break, I always looked forward to returning to the house where I grew up. Thompson Farm, with its vast fields and wooden fences that had faded over time, was a place where every corner of the yard held a childhood memory of mine. That dinner was my last dinner at home before returning to Cedar Falls. My father, Jack Thompson, a quiet man with calloused hands, unexpectedly shared many stories about the past. There was a special moment when he put his hand on my shoulder, looked straight into my eyes with a rare, affectionate look, and said, "Son, this farm will always be your home." I didn't expect that to be his goodbye words. A few hours after dinner, while I was fixing the old heater in the living room, a desperate cry from my mother Martha rang out from the barn. Not a typical call, but the cry for help of a panicked wife. That sound froze me for a moment. I rushed outside without grabbing a coat. The cold 5-degree wind blew through my thin sweater, cutting mercilessly into my skin. The 12-inch thick snow made each step feel like being sucked down, but fear pushed me forward. When I reached the barn, the sight before me made my heart ache. My father was lying on the wet straw floor, his face frighteningly pale, his weak breath escaping as thin clouds in the freezing air. His eyes were tightly closed, and his lips had turned light purple. My mother knelt beside him, her trembling hands placed on his chest. When she looked up at me, her eyes were full of tears and desperation. Her voice shook. "Call an ambulance. Hurry." With frozen hands, I called emergency services. The line kept being busy. Looking out the window, I saw snow still falling heavily, covering all the roads leading to the farm. A feeling of helplessness rose in me. I knelt beside Dad, trying to remember the medical knowledge I'd learned from working on medical equipment repairs. His heartbeat was weak and irregular. When I rolled up his pant leg, I saw a small wound on his calf that had swollen and turned purple-black with red streaks spreading signs of severe infection. For 40 long minutes, I sat there, holding Dad's hand tightly, whispering words of encouragement. Martha kept wiping the cold sweat from his forehead, her eyes never leaving the face of the man she'd loved for 40 years. When the paramedics finally arrived, a young man quickly checked Jack's condition. He looked up with a serious expression. "His condition is critical. We need to get him to the hospital immediately." They put my father on a stretcher, and I held his ice-cold hand tightly. For a moment, his eyes opened slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but then closed again. After more than 40 minutes on the road, Mom and I sat in the ambulance, our hearts burning. Mom's trembling hand gripped mine tightly, while the paramedic constantly monitored Dad's vital signs. The steady beeping from the heart monitor felt like counting down the remaining time of hope. Just yesterday, my father was laughing and talking, still healthy, still patiently teaching me how to fix the old lawnmower. But I had no idea that with the hard life of a man who had devoted his entire life to cattle and fields, an insignificant wound had silently threatened his life. My father was always someone who never complained. He would bandage a small wound with an old piece of cloth and continue working, as if his body were a tireless machine. When we arrived at the hospital, everything happened like a whirlwind. Dad was immediately wheeled into the emergency room, and doctors and nurses swarmed around him like busy bees. While waiting in the cold hallway, a young doctor with tired eyes came out and gently announced, "Mr. Thompson is suffering from severe sepsis. The wound on his leg got infected and spread into his bloodstream. We're treating aggressively, but the condition is severe." The moment I received that bad news, my heart seemed to stop beating. Blood poisoning meant bacteria had spread throughout his body, attacking his internal organs. And the chances of survival, as I knew from my work, depended on the speed of detection and treatment. But how long had my father been carrying that wound? A day? A week? While I was still confused about Dad's condition, Caleb, my younger brother, also rushed to the hospital, breathing heavily and still wearing his coat. Seeing my mother standing crying by the hospital bed and me staring blankly at the tubes and machines, Caleb hugged Mom's shoulders, his eyes showing undisguised fear. We 3 adults stood there like lost children, having to witness the man who had been strong all his life now lying motionless, dependent on machines to maintain life. The following days were truly the worst. I took time off from the medical equipment repair shop because I was afraid that if I left the hospital, I wouldn't have the chance to say goodbye to Dad. I understood the meaning of the numbers on the screen better than anyone: weakening heartbeat, unstable blood pressure, and declining oxygen levels in the blood. Mom and Caleb went back and forth between the hospital and the farm. Mom still had to take care of the cattle and maintain farm operations, work that Dad had done every day throughout his life. Every day I looked at Mom with eyes red from sleeplessness and worry, but I still secretly hoped for some miracle to happen, that my father would open his eyes and ask to go home with his familiar hoarse voice. But perhaps miracles aren't meant for simple farmers like my father. 21 days later, we sat in the hospital's cold conference room. Dr. Warren, who had been treating Dad for 3 weeks, walked in with a laptop and a thick file in hand. Her face couldn't hide the fatigue and professional sadness, the kind of emotion only those who regularly face death possess. When Dr. Warren opened the laptop, displaying brain scans and Dad's internal organs on the large screen, I felt a cold current run down my spine. The dark areas on the brain scans and the white spots on the liver and kidneys. I knew enough to understand that those weren't good signs. Dr. Warren slowly explained, her voice dropping. The infection has spread to his blood, causing multiple organ failure. Mr. Thompson's liver, kidneys, and heart have been severely damaged. We've done everything we can, but his condition isn't improving. Upon hearing those words, Mom burst into tears, her sobbing echoing in the small room. Caleb hugged Mom's shoulders, trying to comfort her, but his eyes were also red. As for me, I sat motionless, feeling as if my soul had left my body, leaving an empty shell trying to process the information. After a heavy silence, Dr. Warren gently suggested, I think it's time we should consider transitioning to end-of-life care. Mr. Thompson would be cared for at home, comfortably and with dignity in his final days. Caleb, with a trembling voice but trying to stay calm, asked, Is there any possibility for Dad to recover, Doctor? Dr. Warren looked straight into our eyes, shaking her head slightly. Almost none. The organ damage is too severe. I clung to the word almost like a drowning person grabs a straw. With a voice hoarse from holding back tears, I suggested we want to continue treatment. Just 1 more week. Dr. Warren, with understanding, explained the situation. I understand your feelings, but you need to know that health insurance has refused to pay more. Intensive care costs can range from $4,500 to $5,000 a day. And more importantly, I don't want to prolong his suffering when there's no hope of improvement. Finally, with trembling hands and tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks, Mom signed the discharge papers. Each stroke of the pen was like a goodbye, a painful acceptance of the inevitable. I looked at her, the strong woman now like an old willow tree in a strong wind, and understood this was one of the most challenging decisions of her life. On the way home, Caleb suddenly turned and asked me, Do you know how much life insurance Dad has? That question was like a knife stabbed into my heart, and became the starting point for the prolonged battle I never wanted to join. The day we brought Dad home from the hospital, time seemed to have stolen away the strongest man I'd ever known. My father wasn't big or burly like other fathers, but he'd never let us see his weakness. To me, Jack Thompson was always the model of strength and patience. In those days, we placed him in the living room where he could see the field through the large window. From a man who could pull a stuck cow out of mud, he now lay motionless, skin pale, weak, breathing dependent on a ventilator. Tubes tangled across his body, a small monitor beside him showing an irregular heartbeat and blood oxygen levels continuously dropping to alarming levels. The moments Dad was conscious became rare and precious. Sometimes, during his delirium from painkillers, I often saw him grab my arm or touch my head when I was lying slumped beside the bed. During those times, I cried alone, tears falling long and soaking into the bedspread. I remembered his calloused hands, which had taught me how to hold a hammer, how to grip horse reins, how to sow seeds into the ground. Those hands now were thin and trembling, with blue veins clearly visible under the thin skin. Looking at him then, heartbreakingly pitiful. And I kept praying. I asked God to give my father more time, even just a few days, a few hours. As long as he was still here, I would dedicate the rest of my life to him. I would return to the farm, give up my job in the city to take care of him and Mom. However, perhaps not every child thinks like I do. The third night after bringing Dad home, I was staying up late checking the ventilator when I heard whispers from the kitchen. Those whispers weren't prayers for Dad's health, but cold numbers and calculations. Gently placing Dad's hand down on the bed, I crept into the hallway, my heart beating faster as the words became clearer. Standing behind the cracked kitchen door, I heard Caleb's voice full of excitement and urgency. $180,000, Mom. Insurance will pay if Dad dies within 30 days of hospital admission. Right after that, with a voice full of pain and choking, my mother scolded Caleb. Don't say that, son. That's your father. How can you? Not letting Mom finish. Caleb lowered his voice but continued persuading with determination. The bank will foreclose on the farm in 45 more days if we don't pay the mortgage. You'll have nowhere to go. Do you want to become homeless at 60? A heavy silence. Then, with a trembling and tired voice, the woman I'd always thought was the strongest I'd ever known confessed. I need $32,000 for heart surgery. The doctor says if I don't get it, I might not make it through next winter. After a long sigh, Mom continued with a voice full of pain. I can't keep watching your father suffer like this, Caleb. That's not the Jack I know anymore. Your father wouldn't want to live like this. With a gentle but confident voice, Caleb comforted Mom. Sue, the hospice nurse, told me that removing the breathing tube is the most humane thing right now. Dad won't feel anything, Mom, like going to sleep. Unable to bear it anymore, I burst the door open into the kitchen, startling both of them. With eyes blazing with angry fire and a voice breaking but full of determination, I confronted them. Are you putting a price on Dad's life? $180,000 is the price of his breath? My mother looked like she'd been hit in the chest, her red eyes wide with horror mixed with guilt. She stepped back, her thin hands clutching her chest as if to keep her heart from breaking. Tears rolled down her deeply wrinkled face. Meanwhile, Caleb straightened up and stepped to face me. My brother's chin jutted out slightly in the defensive posture familiar from when we were boys who used to argue, a posture signaling that he wouldn't back down. His eyes flashed with challenge. Just then, with a choked voice and tear-filled eyes, Mom hurriedly explained. Mason, you don't understand. It's not what you think. Our financial situation is terrible. The mortgage is due, I need surgery, and there's Dad's hospital bills. Her voice broke, interrupted as she continued, Your father wouldn't want us to lose the farm. This is everything he built his whole life. Instantly, with a face red with anger and hands clenched into fists, Caleb stepped forward and confronted me. You think you're the only one who loves Dad? You think you're more moral than us just because you haven't been here these past years? Didn't have to watch Dad work himself to exhaustion to save this farm. His voice rose, almost shouting in my face as he continued. Why are you fighting this? You want to prolong Dad's suffering, make him lie there like a living corpse, just because you can't accept the truth that he'll never wake up again? Each of Caleb's words was like a knife stabbing my heart. I felt anger rising, along with ultimate pain. I looked straight into my brother's eyes, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. With my voice dropping, I replied word by word, clearly and coldly. I'm not fighting letting Dad go. I'm fighting doing it for money. After emphasizing the last word and stepping closer to Caleb, I continued. Dad will go when he's ready, not when we need insurance money to pay bills. After a deep breath to control my trembling, I continued. Dad spent his whole life worrying about us. He sacrificed sleep, health, youth, and everything for this farm, for us. When it's our turn, can't we give him the time and respect he deserves? When emotions overflowed, I couldn't control my voice. Do we really have to trade his life for the farm? Is that the fairness we give him? My words hit like a direct blow. Mom burst into sobbing, her thin shoulders shaking with each painful sob. She collapsed into a chair, hands covering her face, as if unable to bear this situation. Caleb stood there, his whole body stiff, his eyes wavering between anger and pain. Then suddenly, he spun around, punched the wall hard, leaving a dent in the old wooden fence. Before quickly stepping out of the kitchen, he choked out, You don't understand anything. The sound of the door slamming echoed in the quiet night. I stood there, feeling an invisible distance widening between me and my family, a bottomless abyss that I didn't know if I could cross. After the argument, I didn't sleep a wink. I sat by Dad's bed, listening to each weak breath through the ventilator, and wondered if I was being selfish wanting to keep him here, or if Caleb and Mom were the selfish ones wanting him gone for insurance money. I held his hand tightly, whispering words of love without knowing if he could still hear. When the first light of dawn shone through the window, Sue, the hospice nurse, arrived with her gentle smile and familiar, compassionate eyes. But today she brought a stack of DNR papers, do not resuscitate, and a termination of life support form requiring the guardian's signature. My heart sank when I realized that my mother was Dad's legal guardian, and the final decision was in her hands. That morning, when I saw Mom's determined attitude, instead of getting angry, I begged her to give me more time, and perhaps, seeing tears falling down my cheeks, my mother burst into tears and ran to the barn, leaving me with Dad and the unsigned DNR papers. But I didn't want to give up on him. My father was still here, still breathing, still warm. Why should I let an insurance deadline decide when his heart stopped beating? A week after the confrontation with my family, I decided to take action. For 3 days, I secretly prepared the old woodshed, where my father had taught me to build my first chair. I ran power lines from the generator, installed backup heaters, and brought along medical equipment I borrowed from work. At 2 in the morning, I gently wheeled Dad's bed out of the room, each creak of the wheels like a scream in the quiet night. My heart pounded, my throat tightened with fear. Every slight sound could wake my mother and ruin the plan. With extreme care, I gently lifted Dad onto the prepared truck. His body was frighteningly light, as if illness had eaten away at every muscle fiber. I placed him safely on the truck bed that had been padded with mattresses, then carefully reconnected the oxygen tank and portable ventilator. After leaving a letter on the kitchen table for Mom, I drove slowly through the snowy field, avoiding every pothole that could disturb Dad's condition. The woodshed was hidden behind a row of tall pine trees, far enough away that no one would notice the lights and generator noise. Inside, everything was ready. I positioned the bed so Dad could look out the window, facing the field where he used to watch the sunrise each morning. After adjusting the ventilator and settings, I sat down beside him, exhausted but relieved. When the first rays of sunlight came through the window, I heard a car approaching. Sue, the hospice nurse, had found us. With stern eyes and a firm voice, she stepped in and shouted, "Mason Thompson, you can't do this, this is kidnapping. I can call the police right now." I stood facing her, tired but firmly explaining, "Sue, I just want my father to have the chance to go his way, not according to the deadline of an insurance contract." Sue checked the vital signs and connections, her expression gradually changing from anger to amazement. "You've set up a mini intensive care station here. How do you know how to?" I smiled tiredly and replied, "I've been repairing medical equipment for almost 10 years. I know how to take care of him." After a long conversation, Sue finally agreed to visit twice a week, provided I followed safety procedures. When she left, I didn't know that within 48 hours, a terrible blizzard would completely isolate us and put me in a position to make a life-or-death decision. On the 25th day after my father was hospitalized, snow covered the windows, wind howled outside like a wild beast, and the generator began making wheezing sounds signaling danger. I sat by Dad's bed, my mind spinning between guilt and determination. For many nights, I wondered if I was prolonging his suffering or really giving him the chance to go his own way. The blizzard had lasted 2 days, getting fiercer each time. The temperature dropped to the point where everything outside the woodshed froze. The night before, the power grid had failed, forcing me to rely on the backup generator, which was now malfunctioning due to fuel overflow in extreme cold conditions. I tried desperately to repair it, my hands shaking from cold and fear. The backup lights flickered, signaling instability. The battery display showed only enough for 6 hours of ventilator operation, not enough to get through the storm expected to last until the end of the night. While I struggled with the generator, trying to get it running again, another sound rang out amid the howling wind, the sound of a car engine. My heart seemed to stop as headlights cut through the thick snow curtain, shining straight into the woodshed. Just a minute later, the door burst open, a gust of cold wind and snow rushing in. My mother, Caleb, and a large man in a police uniform entered. Sheriff Miller, my father's longtime friend. It turned out that throughout the past days, my mother's silence wasn't because she accepted my decision. She knew exactly where I had taken Dad. She was waiting for the right moment, and perhaps waiting for me to realize my madness. With a face red from anger and cold, Caleb rushed toward me, shouting, "You can't keep him here. This is kidnapping. What have you done to Dad?" Before I could answer, Sheriff Miller stepped forward, his eyes full of pity as he looked at me. "Mason, I understand your feelings, but you have to follow the legal guardian's decision. That's the law." My mother stood there. Tears had frozen into small streaks on her cheeks. She said nothing, just looked at me with eyes both painful and pleading. I'd never seen her look so old and fragile. I backed away, standing between them and Dad's bed. With a voice trembling from emotion, I tried to justify. "You don't understand. I'm not doing this to fight you. I'm doing this for Dad so he can—" Suddenly, amid the extreme tension, an alarm from the monitor cut off my words. A shrill, continuous sound signaled that Dad's heartbeat had suddenly spiked. We all turned to look, as if mesmerized by that sound and the numbers dancing on the screen. Then something no one expected happened. Jack Thompson opened his eyes. Not the unconscious blink that sometimes happened in recent weeks. This was a conscious, clear look, blue eyes lighting up with life I thought was lost forever. The room suddenly fell breathlessly silent. All four of us stood frozen, not daring to believe what we were witnessing. My father looked around, his gaze stopping on each face. When his eyes stopped on me, a weak smile appeared on his cracked lips. With extraordinary effort, he raised his thin hand, waving me closer. I knelt by the bed, taking his hand. That hand was warmer than usual, as if life was surging one last time. With a hoarse and broken voice, my father slowly said, "Mason, your grandfather is waiting for me in the field." My mother burst into sobbing, moving closer to the bed. Caleb stood frozen in place, mouth agape, speechless. Sheriff Miller bowed his head, as if witnessing something sacred. But only I understood the true meaning of those words. My grandfather, who died 15 years ago, the field, where father and son used to walk together every evening, where my grandfather once said he would wait for my father when the time came. That was a promise between them, a family secret that was shared only with me. In that moment, Dad looked at me with completely lucid eyes, a look full of love, gratitude, and a silent message that only I could read. Then, gently like a falling leaf, he closed his eyes, and the numbers on the screen began to drop sharply. In that cold room, amid the howling wind and steady beeping of machines, I understood exactly what Dad wanted. That's when I knew what I had to do, even if the whole world thought I was cruel. Just 5 minutes after my father woke up and said those words that seemed like something you'd only see in movies, he fell into a rapid state of exhaustion. In that moment, I realized there wasn't much time left. Without waiting for medical personnel, without waiting for anyone else's opinion, I decided to do with my own hands what my father wanted, because I had seen him truly suffering even though he couldn't say it. With trembling hands and tearing pain in my heart, while my mother was still panicking from Dad's strange moment of consciousness, while my brother was still rambling about me kidnapping Dad, I approached his bedside, carefully turned off the ventilator, and slowly removed the tube from my father's trachea. The moment they saw my action, Mom cried out in panic, "Mason, what are you doing?" "No." At the same time, Caleb rushed over, his face contorted with fear, trying to pull me away from the bed. "You can't do that. Stop it." Sheriff Miller also rushed toward me, but then he suddenly stopped, his eyes widening as he looked at my father's face, a face that was gradually relaxing, no longer showing the pain that had appeared for weeks. I turned around, looking straight at them, my voice breaking but firm. "Don't you understand? When someone is about to go, they know. And Dad is ready." Then I turned back to Dad, whispering in his ear, "You can go meet Grandpa now, we'll be okay. I love you, Dad. Thank you for everything." My mother stood frozen, tears flowing, but they were no longer tears of panic. She slowly approached, sat down beside her husband, and took his hand. Caleb stepped back, leaning against the wall, his eyes red with anger and pain, but he no longer had the strength to stop me. Perhaps a part of him also understood this was the right thing to do. Sheriff Miller stood silent, not interfering, his face reflecting the deep understanding of someone who had witnessed many partings in life. In that moment, I saw a smile flash across Dad's lips, gentle, peaceful. Seeing this, Mom bent down, placed a kiss on her husband's forehead, tears falling on his face. "See you there, Jack," she whispered. His heartbeat slowed. His breathing became lighter. In the room, only the sound of wind whistling through the door crack and my father's broken breathing remained. We stood there, for different people but connected by love for the man slowly leaving this world. When the last breath left Dad's body, a strange sense of peace filled the room, as if the field to the east had opened up, and Jack Thompson was walking toward his father, free and no longer in pain. So just 25 days after my father was hospitalized, I personally took away his last breath. My fingertips still remember the feeling of the breathing tube sliding out of Dad's trachea, a painful memory that will follow me for life. While my heart shattered with each beat, my mind still believed it was what Dad wanted, the last gift I could give him. I thought the pain would be shared equally among all family members. I naively thought Mom and Caleb would also go through sleepless nights, remembering the laughter, voice, and even Dad's familiar cigarette smell. But I was wrong. The coffin had just been lowered into the cold ground at the town cemetery, not yet covered with dirt. Still, my mother and brother had already started discussing the insurance money, as well as saving the farm and debt payment plans. Their conversations always ended abruptly when I appeared, as if I were an outsider, unworthy of being included. I wondered, had they gotten over the pain too quickly, or was my mind too weak to accept reality? Was their love for Dad different from mine, or had money clouded their grief? These questions kept spinning in my head every time I caught their exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't paying attention. I thought time would heal the wounds, that my family would find each other again in shared grief. But I didn't expect a meeting at the insurance company would not only open a new wound but also expose an unbridgeable gap between us. The Midwestern Mutual Insurance office on Main Street was flooded with sunlight, a stark contrast to our gloomy mood as we entered, just a week after Dad's simple funeral. Frank Miller, Dad's close friend for 30 years and the local insurance representative, greeted us with a serious expression he couldn't hide. There was something in his eyes that made me uneasy. As soon as we sat down, with a tense face and hurried voice, my mother got straight to the point. "We're here to collect my husband's life insurance, Frank. As you know, we need it to save the farm." Frank looked at each of us. Then, with a professional manner mixed with hesitation, he slowly flipped through the file. He solemnly said, "Jack changed the beneficiary 6 months before being hospitalized, Martha." Upon hearing that, my mother went pale, as if blood had drained from her body. She stammered, "That's impossible. I'm his wife, always the beneficiary. Jack would never do that without telling me." Frank pushed a stack of papers across the table, his finger pointing to the line highlighted in yellow. "The new beneficiary is Mason Thompson. Jack's signature is apparent, Martha. He came here alone and insisted on keeping this secret." I was stunned, unable to believe what I just heard. Caleb, sitting next to me, suddenly stood up, his eyes blazing with anger. With uncontrollable rage, he pointed straight at my face and said through gritted teeth, "So that's the reason. You opposed us removing Dad's breathing tube, but then you did it yourself because you knew you were the beneficiary. You're a murderer, Mason. You killed Dad for money." My mother turned to look at me, her eyes both angry and painful, tears rolling down her wrinkled face. "Did you take Dad's breath away for money, Mason? Did you deceive the whole family? Take Dad away to wait for the right moment?" The accusations stabbed into my heart like sharp knives. I stood up, my head spinning, trying to explain. "That's not it. I had no idea about changing the beneficiary. How could I have known?" Before Caleb could react, Frank stood up, his voice dropping but enough to cut through the argument. "That's right. Jack absolutely kept this secret. He didn't want Mason's decision to be influenced." Frank opened a drawer, took out a USB, and continued. "Jack also left a video confirming this decision when he was still lucid. He knew there might be arguments, so he prepared in advance." The room fell silent as Frank played the video on the computer. My father's face appeared healthy, much more alert than it had been in his final days. He looked straight into the camera and spoke about his decision, his trust in me, and how he was confident that I would handle the money responsibly. When we left the office, no one spoke to anyone. Caleb walked ahead, his shoulders stiff with anger. My mother shuffled slowly, as if all strength had left her body. Just as I was about to exit, Frank pulled me back and said quietly, "Jack left this for you, but he said only to give it when you're alone." He placed an old envelope in my hand, heavy with trust. I didn't expect the contents inside would change everything. After that day, I drove to the lake, where Dad used to take me fishing every weekend when I was little. Sitting on the familiar flat rock, I tremblingly opened the letter he left before the tragedy happened. It contained only a few short lines, but was full of weight. "Dear Mason, if you're reading these lines, I'm no longer with you. I left everything to you because I trust you'll do the right thing. Others will only think about themselves, but you always think about everyone. Don't let anyone steal your kindness. Love you, Dad." Maybe my father had foreseen something we couldn't. Perhaps he had realized that my family wasn't truly aligned in our values, between love and money, between loyalty and survival. And with that final decision, he had entrusted the farm's fate and the family's future to the son everyone still considered the weakest. But Mom and Caleb didn't give up easily. Under financial pressure and anger, before I could even speak up to redistribute the assets, they quickly sued me for undue influence and murder for financial motive. Accusations so painful I couldn't look into my mother's eyes during the trial. The trial took place 3 months later, with testimony from Frank Miller and the video Dad had left behind. The most surprising thing was that Sheriff Miller, who was present that fateful night, testified about my father's final moment of consciousness. He confirmed seeing clearly the change in Dad's eyes and understanding the message in his final words about grandfather in the field. Along with Sue's report, the judge completely dismissed all charges. Justice was served, but this victory only left me with the bitter taste of a broken family. I never wanted to take everything for myself. Throughout that time, I was like a child tormented by mental anguish. Every time I walked into the grocery store, I felt probing eyes and whispers, turning me into a stranger in my own hometown. Finally, when the entire $180,000 insurance was transferred to my account, I divided it into 3 equal parts: $60,000 for my mother's heart surgery and to pay Dad's hospital bills, $60,000 to save the farm from bank foreclosure, and the remaining $60,000 to establish the Jack Thompson Fund, supporting farming families with relatives needing end-of-life care but lacking financial means. To date, the fund has helped 17 families, 17 people who passed away with dignity, not because of a deadline on an insurance contract. I didn't keep a single penny from that money for myself. Today, another winter has come, and my father sleeps peacefully under the soft soil. I still work at the medical equipment repair shop, and every time I fix a ventilator, I remember Dad's final moment, and know I did the right thing. My mother still stays on the farm. Her heart surgery was successful, and sometimes she sends holiday cards, but never signs them, just blank cards with farm images, a silent reminder of what was lost. My brother got promoted at the bank and has a small family. I send gifts on my niece's birthday, but they're never acknowledged. The wall of suspicion between us has become too thick to overcome. That's not the ending anyone wanted, but I chose to live for myself, for my respected father, and for those who need help. Time taught me that any pain can heal, but only cracks in family bonds can never be mended again. And that's where my story ends. Thank you for listening this far. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave comments about the difficult decisions in your life. See you in the following stories.